So good morning, everyone. Welcome to Candid Conversations with our law enforcement advocates. This is part of our Sexual Assault Awareness Month programming. This week, we're focusing on the community that surrounds victims and survivors of sexual assault. And in that community are our law enforcement advocates. So we're going to have a conversation today about engaging law enforcement and really picking their brain on how they can be advocates, and it'll be a really engaging conversation. Just a few housekeeping items. So for those in attendance, we're going to keep you all on mute. If you have any questions, just drop them down in the chat box below. And when we get to the question and answer session, we'll be able to address some of those questions. And should we have time near the end, we'll allow you to unmute and ask questions of our law enforcement advocates on the panel. So thank you all for attending, and it should be a really good session. So first I'm going to start off, and I'm just going to go round robin, randomly picking folks. Going to start off by introducing or allowing our panelists to introduce themselves. So throughout this, I'll maybe ask in random order different questions and engage the panelists in different. I'm not going to ask you all the same questions. I want it to be really engaging. So how about this? Let's start with Rebecca. Rebecca, thank you for joining us. If you would please introduce yourself, what organization you represent, a little bit about you, and what areas of interest you may have.
Sure. Thank you, Marquise. Hi, my name is Rebecca Zipp. I work at the City Attorney's Office, where I'm the chief of the Domestic Violence and Sex Crimes Unit. We have about 15 or 16 attorneys in our unit at any time and 3 full-time victim services coordinators. Before joining the city attorney, I worked with Trish Amador at the district attorney's office. We were in the same DDA class, getting sworn in 2008. Sorry, Trish, to blow your cover for how old we are now. And I really love training and mentoring newer attorneys. We handle all the domestic violence, sexual assault misdemeanors. So we handle all misdemeanors within the city of San Diego at the city attorney's office. And so my unit handles the domestic violence, sexual assault cases, indecent exposure, as well as elder abuse and child abuse that fall under misdemeanors. And I do have a passion for elder abuse. I did a lot of elder financial abuse cases while I was at the DA's office. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to engaging you in conversation. And so since you already introduced Tricia, I'll go ahead and hand it over to her. So if you tell us a little bit about who you are, who you represent in some areas.
Thanks, Rebecca. Good morning, Marquise. Good morning, everybody. I just want to thank you for having me. I'm generally over at San Diego State for a lot of the programs for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So I really was honored to be asked to join you guys for this month. I am, Rebecca said, I've been a DA since 2008. I work in the Sex Crimes and Human Trafficking Division. I work downtown where I'm our downtown team leader. We have a very small division downtown, so we have a very high caseload. Our division handles sexual assault cases that are felony cases, late report child molest cases, stalking cases, human trafficking cases involving pimping, pandering, human trafficking, sexually violent predator cases. I know there's been a lot in the news about individuals being released in Mount Helix right now. We handle those cases. And I handle a majority of our drug and alcohol facilitated sexual assaults. Through a case that I had several years ago, I developed a training program for law enforcement on investigative techniques to have more of our cases issued, since they are some of the most difficult cases for our office to issue and prosecute. So we took a proactive approach and developed a training program that we've presented to all local law enforcement. And I also teach that program to the California District Attorneys Association and National District Attorneys Association in order for us to get some additional cases filed. In addition, I also, like Rebecca, have a passion for these cases and our victims. So I've taken a proactive approach and often lecture to community groups, parents, and other law enforcement agencies, as well as college students. And part of what I do over at San Diego State, which is a real passion for me, is that I don't think we've taken a proactive approach in education. So I speak at their fraternity, their frat manners program. And as part of that program, they take the information back to their sister sororities And it's our goal as an office to try and provide information to prevent sexual assaults, so I don't have that victim in our office. So I'm here and I'm excited to answer any questions that you have. I work with all of our advocacy groups and our SART nurses as well, so I have a little bit of a different take on the medical side also. So if there's any questions about that in the exams, I am here for you.
Oh, thanks for that. And again, if you guys in the audience have any questions, please start to drop them in the chat. So I'm going to transition over now to one of our colleagues from Palomar College, Chief Chris Moore. So Chief Moore, if you would tell us a little bit about yourself, Palomar College, and kind of some of the things that you're responsible for there.
Good morning. My name is Chris Moore. I'm the Chief of Police, the Director of the Police Department here at Palomar College. I think we're kind of a brother or sister college to Southwestern. We're about 25,000 students, probably 200 on campus today, but we are, a Latino dominant serving agency institution. And so we really try to collaborate and work with our community right now and more than ever, building trust, trying to connect with people. And like you said a little earlier, Marquise, just on a human level. So I do hope we can, you can ask those questions today. I'm going to reveal my age very much so that I'm getting ready to hit 30 years of doing this work. And so that's a couple cycles of evolution in policing and community engagement and outreach. And prior to arriving at Palomar, I worked at the Phoenix Police Department in Arizona for 25 years. Very similar size and geography of the city of San Diego. Worked in, as a first responder for a long time in uniform, and, sadly have seen hundreds and hundreds of victims. And I think that's always the most difficult part of the job. And, frankly, that was one of the reasons I left Phoenix, is because some of the problems were unsolvable. Violence was such a part of that city. So it's unfortunate, but it's been the antithesis here at the college, where it's a quiet environment, and we try to do community outreach and events to just talk to students, because as a part of their education and society is, what is the role of the police? And one of my passions as our DA and counterparts is teaching the next generation. So we have a police academy like Southwestern, and I teach in the ethics portion, and it's that and seeing people that work with us as community service officers transition in the profession, and just try to give them that non-traditional view of being a partner to the community, and really and figuratively taking a knee to the community to see what they want from our police. So thank you.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Chief Moore. And so certainly, last but not least, I'm going to transition over to our own chief, someone who refuses to probably even let me call him chief. I'll just say call me Marco. So Chief Bareno, if you could talk a little bit about yourself and some of your areas of passion, a little bit about our campus police department, and then after you, we'll launch into kind of some Q&A sessions.
Well, first and foremost, good morning. Thank you, Marquise. Thank you for this opportunity. I think this kind of engagement, although Zoom is not my preferable, way of contacting people and talking to people, I think it's very important that we have these kinds of programs and at least chances to reach out to students, faculty, and everybody that we serve. I agree with. I'm currently, like you stated, Marquise, I'm the interim chief safety officer for the actual department, and during this role, there's been several issues, even when I was a sergeant here, about people not wanting to come to report certain crimes and having a lot of cultural background difficulties. I've had the opportunity in my career to I've worked in law enforcement for about 17 years, 13 of which have been concentrated on college and universities. To name a few was Grossmont Community College, San Diego State University, now of course Southwestern College. Each campus is dynamic within itself. The fact that we're in the South Bay Area, of course, the amount of Hispanic counterparts that come and live here, and the culture behind the whole thing kind of does have an effect on reporting crimes. I've seen it. I myself was born in Tijuana, Mexico, and And for me, I can understand the dual culture issues on reporting crimes, the trust factor, how that plays a part when someone coming from another country, because the trust factor for the police out there is completely different than the one here. Us being the college, Southwestern College, and in the south, the southernmost part of the county, we have about 60%, I do believe, people that are Hispanic. And a lot of them cross the border, some of them on a daily basis to come down here. So the cultural background is really stuck to them, and the trust between the law enforcement and them is really, really deteriorated in the country. So they bring that in here, and it's very hard to make those connections. So I think we've been making strides here in the campus. I always said one thing though, we have a huge advantage in a college setting versus a city. Okay, and I think Chief Moore will probably attest to that because he's had that experience of working in both entities. The fact that we're a small community permits us to do these kinds of events, these kind of reach out events that I think we start to dig that hole, right? To actually reach out to these people, to have to build that kind of relationship, that trust that Chief Moore was talking about, for them to come out, not only to report crimes, obviously that's our primary function, but a lot of other things, right? We become counselors. We become teachers ourselves. Being in an educational institution is a complete different framework when it comes to law enforcement. That's been at least my experience. And having a multicultural and diverse student body makes it even that more challenging, but that more gratifying once you actually achieve your goals. So I really thank the opportunity for this, and I thank each and every one for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Bareno. This is, I'm looking forward to this as well. So Chief Moore alluded to this fact. Part of the reason that we push for this session is that it takes a village to prevent sexual assault. I'm going to term sexual violence, right? Domestic violence, stalking, dating violence. So it takes a village to build up this prevention-based system. And part of that village is our law enforcement advocates. And I think it's important for victims, survivors, supporters, or fellow preventionists to see the humanistic side of our law enforcement partners, so that when it comes time to report sexual violence, we understand that they're a person and we can help those victims, get into their system. So to that point, I want to go around Robin and ask each one of you. You all play a role, in a different role, but sometimes it's unseen. So what unseen or unrecognized role does law enforcement play in sexual violence prevention? It could be victim advocacy, it could be support, it could be just, I'm getting the facts of the case, but sometimes we don't know what you all do. So Rebecca, I'm gonna ask you to chime in first and talk a little bit about those unseen roles or things we don't kind of see that you guys are involved in.
Sure. So one of the things that we have at the city attorney, and the district attorney has this resource as well, is we have victim services coordinators. The DA has victim advocates. They have a slightly different role, but essentially they're support persons for victims of crimes, including sexual assault. They are available to help victims whether or not there's sufficient evidence to charge a crime. And I think one thing that the public doesn't always understand is why two very similar pieces of conduct might result very differently in the criminal justice system, maybe with one not even having a case filed and the other going all the way to jail or prison. And that has less to do with the facts of the case than the evidence that we have. Because as prosecutors, we have an ethical obligation to only proceed with cases that we believe can be proved in court beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the highest burden that we have in the American court system. So it would not just be an abdication of that duty, it would also be deeply unfair to a victim of crime, particularly a sexual assault victim, to file charges on a case we know is going to lose at trial. Because then what you're doing is you're having that victim testify in court, you're subjecting them to cross-examination, and you are subjecting them to the very real likelihood that the jury will say, no, that didn't beyond a reasonable doubt occur the way you said it did, which is obviously very traumatizing to the victim. So I think it's important for people to know that we do provide services regardless of the state of the evidence in a case. We provide court support. So we recently tried our office's first post-COVID jury trial. It was a misdemeanor serial sexual batterer, and our victim service coordinator accompanied our victims to court. And if people need further services such as long-term counseling, civil legal services, like if they need a civil restraining order because there's not a criminal case, our victim services coordinators can refer them to local agencies who do that work. And it's nicer than cold calling, right? You know, Angela told me to call. So we do a lot of that. And we also, pre-COVID, did a lot more outreach. Now there's less of that, of course, and the outreach we do is on Zoom.
Thank you for that. So Chief Bareno, same question. What is the unseen or unrecognized role that law enforcement plays that us as the public is, we don't think about first of mind or we're not aware of?
Well, for us, I think the major struggle has been we have within our college we have MOUs with different departments, we have agreements with different jurisdictional agencies that help out investigations. We even though we take our report ourselves, we submit the actual investigations to help out either San Diego Police Department, Chula Vista, and work hand in hand with their detectives when we need to do follow-ups and everything else. Sometimes a student will be involved in an incident that did not occur within our jurisdictional area, but it is reported to Title IX, and therefore we need to follow up with them, as well as follow up, especially if it's a student victim that we're talking about. And we need to follow up with them on along with Chula Vista to let them know how the case is going. So sometimes this kind of back and forth of getting that, it's time consuming. And for a victim, that's kind of hard to either wait for results, or they might think that we're not putting the emphasis on the actual case that we should. And the reality is, just like Rebecca was saying, it is a procedure, right, between the DA, between the investigating agency, or whoever's assisting us to check all the boxes and carry this through. And at the same time, we don't want to obviously interview the victim more than we should. I think we've learned that's why we have rules in place. Us and the Title IX department, Janine McIntyre, work very close together, and the Student Affairs Office, in making sure that we're not putting that student through that stress, right? The stress that Rebecca was mentioning about. I mean, why will you put someone on the stand and go through all of this when the outcome's not going to be a favorable one? So we do pay attention to those things. Sometimes it is hard to get that message through. And then sometimes the inference from either the victim or the victim's family thinks that we're not doing as much as we can. So there's minimal things that we can discuss, obviously, in the case, even with family members, right? But we need to make sure that we do our jobs accordingly and following each and every step. Also, them coming out and talking to us, the reporting factor is an issue, the initial reporting factor. That's a major thing that we've been working on, and for them to actually either come to the Title IX office to report or come straight to us and report it. Whatever their level of comfort is on who to go to, even if it's student affairs, we keep advocating, just go and talk to someone. I think that's a major concern that we have. A lot of these things get reported late, and that makes it a lot worse. I'm sure members of the DA will actually agree with me. When you let time lapse, it's worse, it's less practical. So those are the things that we've been trying to work with students as much as we can.
Thank you. I'm going to transition over to Chief Moore, since it's from the law enforcement angle. Anything to add to that question, Chief Moore, about the unrecognized role that law enforcement plays?
I think it's that trust thing that, as I mentioned, with everything going on, that if somebody walks out of their apartment building or a dorm or a classroom at 9 o'clock at night, and they see a black and white police car out there, that they don't think that person's there to hurt them. And secondly, that's a person that is going to initiate the system that connects to the DA, that connects to all the resources, and a lot of times connects to Title IX. And I think also for policing the trauma, the trauma-informed care lens on how to talk to someone reporting any of the spectrum of the sexual violence is very important. And there's so much, and I've been enlightened as well on the shame that's connected to it when it is no fault of their own. And so, when we talk about the unseen and unrecognized is, there's a lot of documentaries right now about serial rapists and serial offenders. And the sad part is they are not allowed to be serial if they're caught and they're brought to the justice system. So I would, especially in a closed community like Chief Bareno said of a campus, you could have, a couple of years ago, we had 2 women that were victimized within a day of each other. And because they both came forward, gave great descriptions, we were able to have the sheriff arrest that person within about 30 hours. And he was a sexually violent predator. I mean, his behavior was on a deep scale of his willingness to offend in public. And he was already being monitored by the county, and he already had prior arrest. And so getting that person off the street was tremendously important. And so, that piece of just willing to start it, all these things don't, come into play. Rebecca is not waiting at 5 o'clock on a Saturday at a street corner in a booth, waiting for someone to come up to her to tell them, how do I get help? And so, and I think to that point too, is the uniform responder, they respond to everything, every spectrum. But really for people to know that there are detectives, that is their passion, that is their choice, is to only work with people in that community. And short of that initial report, that's where it will go to. And that's where the in-depth and the advocacy and the investigation will happen. And so I think it's trying to get our people in uniform that have maybe a 20 or 30-minute encounter to realize that's not the beginning and the end of it, that there are so many more touch points where there'll even be greater compassion and care to navigate them through the system.
Thank you for that. And there's been some really good, even for me, kind of points that have been jumping out I'm going to touch on a little bit later. But Tricia, I'm going to come to you because I know the DA has a role that you guys play that we probably as the public don't see. But what unseen or unrecognized role does the district attorney's office play and other law enforcement from your viewpoint play that maybe the public isn't aware about?
Well, I think Rebecca touched on a lot of it, but I think the main thing that people should know is that we're people too. We are in this unit because we choose to be in this unit. This isn't an assignment that, as Chief Moore was saying, this is an assignment that you just end up in. This is a real passion for the people that are here. And we don't get paid any more or any less money for a case decision. And I think a lot of the public is always very confused by that. We work for the people of the state of California. We work for every single one of you. And so I want to give a victim justice. I can't ever give back what was taken away from them, but I want to give them justice. But I also have to protect the accused rights as well. And I will not, and I cannot file a case unless I have evidence and meet my ethical obligations. But I want you to know that we work with law enforcement in a trauma-informed way. I work with law enforcement in so many other jurisdictions, and I can tell you that San Diego is much different than a lot of areas. And I know as college students, we have friends in other places, we talk about the college experience, and I have heard some real horror stories. And I'm not just saying this because I work in this unit and I'm proud of the departments. I really am saying it, and I was not nice enough to lie to anybody, that the agencies here in our office in the city attorney is much different in that we take a victim-centered approach. People are always afraid, is there blame? What's going to happen when I come meet with the DA? Am I going to get in trouble for drinking or using drugs? No, the answer is no. I had a woman who was violently and horribly raped, and it's a case that's still going on, that she was very afraid that because she had used heroin, that she was going to be in trouble. And what people don't understand is that you can choose to use heroin, you can choose to commit crimes. I mean, that's not my place to judge, but you're not going to get in trouble. Nobody has the right to do that to you or take that choice away from you. And so I do, just briefly, because I know we've covered all of this, I want people to know we are people and we are here and we are empathetic and we are going to listen to you, and there is never going to be judgment. And we are going to work our butts off with law enforcement that if a crime was committed, we're not going to wash our hands of it ever. This office and Rebecca's office is very, very clear that if you're brave enough to have a voice and you're brave enough to come forward, we're going to be there to support you, not just in advocacy, but follow up with law enforcement. We have district attorney investigators that work with us that are retired or former sworn police officers at different agencies. If there's work that needs to be done, they're going to do it. If the police agency is busy handling another type of matter at that moment and they need somebody to immediately step in, our investigators are going to step in. So I do think it's important that you know that if you're brave enough, and some people aren't, and I understand that, to come forward, to say, I want somebody held accountable, we are going to work with law enforcement and give everybody's case the best chance that we possibly can to get justice.
Thank you. You made a point that I want to tease out from the panelists a little bit. And Chief Moore touched on it earlier about these feelings of guilt in the victim. So can you, and I'll start with, I think I'm going to start with Chief Bareno on this one. Can you speak about, when a victim has feelings of guilt, doubt, or fear, when they need to report an act of sexual violence? Just to give a little bit of background, I had a colleague come out and talk about, an instance where she was stalked and she didn't want to get the stalker in trouble. Like the victim looking out for the oppressor is weird to me. But can you speak about that? How often does this occur? And, how does it usually play out when someone wants to report, but they're fearful for what will happen to the person that harmed them?
Well, unfortunately, you're right. You're correct, Marquise. A lot of the victims of sexual assault, stalking, etc., domestic violence, even, it's a technique. They blame themselves for a lot of the situations that happen. Happens more common than not, and not only that, also society as a whole, right? Especially in the younger, and it does happen on older people, but especially on the younger crowd, they don't know what if a student slaps if a male student slaps a female student inappropriately, right, in a body part or whatever, and it's not viewed as any type of because they do it to other friends, right? And there's that peer pressure that's building around them not to report it, because come on, are you really going to get him in trouble like that? They're going to call him now to school and now he's going to be in trouble for that. So that kind of demeanor from the peer pressure aspect of it, that's one thing that actually breaks them from doing something. But the reality is that usually the suspects, or the people that are behaving this way, they tend to pick on those people, the people who do not report, the quiet one, the one that's shy, the one that really doesn't come out, the one that is not outgoing. I had, unfortunately, I had a family member of mine, which I spoke to her before sharing this with you guys, because I thought it was important. She's a cousin of mine that was raped in Mexico, and I was the first one that she told about it. This was 6 months after that happened. She decided to tell me, and we grew up as almost as brothers and sisters, literally next door to each other. So we're very close, and she never mentioned it. She never mentioned to her sisters. She never mentioned to her parents. And she finally, months later decided, hey, you know what? I can't keep this. And the whole thing was that she felt guilty because of the way she was dancing on that night in a dance floor, right? So when I heard it initially, and this was before I went into law enforcement, I was a paramedic at the time. I wasn't even in law enforcement, but I had treated people that suffered through this. And what shocked me was that she was legitimately blaming herself, even when she was confessing that to me, that it was her fault. She just needed to get it out because she needed to talk to someone. Her family's a very religious family, and she didn't want to share that. That plays another whole part into it. And I think it's a lot of pressure that the victim feels. It's a lot of guilt, remorse sometimes when it's not there. And if they don't talk to anyone outside of these kinds of conversations, if they're privileged to talk to someone in this venue and listens to that, they don't know about this. They don't have that lending hand. So they truly believe that it was something wrong they did, whether it was dancing a certain way or dressing a certain way, or the fact that, hey, you know what, maybe I triggered this behavior. And I think that coupled with the, I don't want to get anyone in trouble because I'm not sure if that's my fault. Those things coupled together makes it really hard for people to come out and say and really tell when something is wrong. They need to recognize that they've been victimized, as whether it's a slap or an inappropriate slap or is a full rape. If it's inappropriate behavior, it should be reported. And breaking that silence is the actual thing that is most difficult for these victims. And we need to reach out to them and give them an opportunity to do that.
And just to follow on that, Chief Moore, kind of speak to some of your experience around, seeing this guilt or this fear and how, you've seen law enforcement kind of help the victim move past or be able to overcome that guilt or fear and report what happened to them.
Well, it's, kind of an extreme in our evolution of thinking, but the DA Summer Stephan has given a lot of attention to human trafficking. Our college worked on a documentary featuring women who had been trafficked, and I got to talk to some of those ladies. And 30 years ago, law enforcement, a lot of my initial interactions with accusation of sexual assault were from prostitutes, and the scale was tilted then. They were not viewed as victims because of their participation in an activity. And that was, just so wrong, and all the good that has been done with that. And, you take it from the male aspect of, gay men who, because they were at a nightclub or because they were somewhere, they were placed in a position and they didn't report. And also both of those communities had distrust of police. So kind of 30 years into it now, I think that's the scary part of intimate partner violence is, oh, they were having a bad day. I know there's a lot going on at work. And so they excuse that behavior. And, I'm a dad of 2 daughters, and I would just say, I think sometimes women give men more of a benefit of the doubt, sometimes in situations, whether it's a college situation, and it's unfortunate. I just think they're more empathetic and sympathetic people as a community, but a lot of times the context surrounding how the event occurred seems to add shame, whether it's drinking, whether it's, even having to tell family that you were involved in some type of sexual activity, or, and we're going to talk about this later, but just the whole social media that, in a moment of passion or affection, someone could take a picture of you and then want to use that as leverage in, dating violence or stalking. It's so much more complex. And really the big thing is, as Chief Bareno said, that we would hope we would have someone we could talk to that, I think in life, everybody, should know a doctor, should know a lawyer, should know a police officer, because it does humanize the occupation a lot more than, Law and Order, the 9th version of whatever city they're in. I think you would just know that, no, it's you can report it. And the police, in a good and a bad way, they detach from most crime. So they don't really think about, well, why were you there? That does happen in those initial interviews, but in this day and age, I just think police just want to know, what happened and how can we get you connected to resources. I think police have done a better job, and it's an ongoing thing of removing well, what were you doing there? Well, how many people were at that party? And that kind of shame that the police put on victims, where I think we've kind of backed off and said, okay, let's just hear the story. that's the most important part, and trying to find justice for the person involved.
Thank you so much. So Rebecca, coming to you next. I know once it gets to your level, there's been police involvement already, and you're just kind of shepherding it through the process and trying to make sure there's justice. So at your level, how does this fear or guilt or shame by the victim impact your role? And what are some of the things that victims or survivors, or what are some of the things you've helped victims or survivors with, so they could overcome it and be able to report it and go through the process?
Sure. So that's a big question. I guess I think it's no surprise that people feel those senses of shame. And in America, for better or worse, we sort of have this deep set admiration for the outlaw, right? Bonnie and Clyde and Jesse James and all of them, right? We admire them. And we do have this culture where we don't want to tell on someone, right? And so it's understandable that a victim of a sexual assault or a domestic violence, especially where they know the person who's inflicted harm on them, doesn't want to cause harm on that other person. I think that's where a lot of the shame comes from. And what we do is, if they're amenable to it, we can set them up with long-term counseling. We do assure them it's not their fault. And, I'll speak for everyone on this panel. I'm guessing we've all made mistakes. It doesn't mean you deserve to have something terrible happen to you if you've made a mistake. I also think that, part of why victims feel this way is, I know it's changing, and maybe Trish or one of the chiefs can speak to this, but when I went to college in 1999, all of our sexual assault prevention education was aimed at the women. Don't walk alone on campus at night. Call one of the campus escorts, go with a friend, don't drink too much. If you're going out drinking, make sure one of you can babysit. And I don't remember anyone ever saying anything to any of the men about not touching a woman who is drunk, or if a woman says to stop, stop. I never heard any of that, and we attended co-ed sexual assault prevention. It was all put on the women. So of course, the sexual assault victims feel that shame. And for male sexual assault victims, I think there's that extra layer, because in America we have this bravado that men can't get hurt physically or emotionally, and of course that's nonsense. Men have feelings just like women. Men can be sexually assaulted just like women. And then there's just that extra layer, because it's not what we imagine when we imagine a victim of sexual assault. So it's not surprising to me that these feelings would be rampant. And I'm sure that I never see the vast majority of victims of these types of crimes, because the shame prevents them from reporting it to law enforcement at all. And to Chief Moreno, the incident that his cousin suffered, that's what we in law enforcement would call a late report. But it's no wonder, because when you report one of these assaults, you're open to questioning, to critique. She had these doubts about her behavior and her decisions, and what if she's judged by the person that she's opening up to. So it's just no wonder that these feelings really percolate in our victims. And I think it takes a lot of trauma-informed counseling to get them through that. And I think in law enforcement and prosecution, we think about it, but we can always do a better job about being trauma-informed and not judging the victim's choices. Because if you're like me, you've made mistakes too, and it doesn't mean you deserve to be sexually assaulted.
Thank you for that. Very, very powerful. So Trish, I know you kind of went there a little bit in your last response, but I want to leave a little bit more room for you on this topic in case you have any more to add about, from a victim standpoint, any feelings of guilt, doubt, or shame, or fear for reporting that they may have.
I think everybody pretty much covered it, but I did want to let people know, I think there's some unseen legal avenues that when people and victims find out about them brings a lot of stress relief. So when a victim comes in here, our office on any case has a face-to-face victim interview, or right now over Zoom. And it is like I said, exceptionally difficult. And I completely understand what Chief Bareno is saying, because I've had those conversations more times than I can count in the last 9 years. And the most important thing is, whether it's a prosecutor or whether you're a friend and somebody is sharing this with you, it is a really impactful thing to say. And here, I was raped. I mean, to even say those words out loud is an amazing step by a person. And I oftentimes do hear well, I was drinking. What if somebody judges me? Is somebody going to ask me these questions? And I think a lot of that fear, really, when law enforcement can take the time and explain, we have some laws in California that are much different than other states. So we have something called Marsy's Law that is written into the California Constitution. And people in other states are always very surprised to hear about this. So when victims have fear or shame and don't want other students or family members finding out about this, we get to explain to them that their business is their business. I am not permitted to talk about their sexual assault with anyone without their direct permission. I can't even confirm that they are a victim with our office. It is also written into the penal code. So I think it's important that people know, if you have that voice and you're brave enough to come forward, the law in California does have some additional steps to help protect you and your story and your truth. So Marsy's Law is a really important thing that does protect victims of crime, especially violence, domestic violence, stalking, sexual assault. But we also have something called the Rape Shield laws. And a lot of times, and it's an evidence code section, a lot of times victims will be concerned, or am I going to be asked about other sexual partners? I don't want to talk about other sexual partners. I had consensual sex with that person. Why should I have to talk about that when this person raped me? In California, it's really unique that we actually exclude, for the most part, we litigate it, but those questions cannot be asked. It's very important, even in the court system, that sexual assault survivors and victims are not re-victimized or made to feel that they made a poor choice or that this was brought upon them. So that is something that we do spend a lot of time educating our victims about when they first come and meet with us and throughout the process, and making sure that they know their legal rights and options. And I know that might sound something so little, Marquise, and the chiefs will know, and Rebecca knows about this as well, that when you see a victim's face, when you tell them, I can protect your privacy, that you can be known as a Jane Doe, that your information will not be put out there, that you cannot be photographed in court, that helps give a little bit of a, I don't want to say stress relief, but a little bit more knowledge and power that the justice system can help protect you as well in going through the process.
Really appreciate that addition. You know, sometimes we don't think about how we re-victimize people, by going through the process. So I really appreciate you pointing that out. So I want to transition a little bit over to talk about this next topic. We've all spent the better part of a year kind of working remotely and, living our lives through online means, whether that be work and our social due to the pandemic. So I want to come to Chief Moore for this particular question. So online abuse is a thing, right? Social media, and it can take so many different forms. So what advice would you give someone who's abused on online dating platforms? And what's the best way to kind of report some of these cases?
Well, I think it's, once again, calling the police. The sad part is the police have to initiate investigations. In a perfect world, I think you would be able to go to the DEA's office and speak to someone like Trisha or Rebecca to start the process, but sadly, we have to start it. And so I really think, I think there's a lot to be said about, if it's happening to you, it can be happening to someone else. And I watched a show not too long ago, I think it was Dear John, does that sound right? Where it was a guy that was brutalizing an affluent woman in Orange County. And the point to that was, she was a smart person, she was educated, she had a family, and this person manipulated her. The premise was online dating. And, people with all the different means they can to build a false narrative, that's the scary part. When I do hear people of I don't want to, I'm so old, I don't even know what some of the platforms are. But it's, and I don't mean to isolate a group, but there have been instances in Uber and Lyft where people have had inappropriate conduct done to them on a platform that is as big as Coca-Cola or Kleenex, where people do rideshare. My son uses rideshare every day of his life to go to work. And there have been cases, and the DA office has handled them, where there's been multiple people that person's victimized. And so that needs to be brought to light, especially when you think about now that rideshare service is taking a vulnerable young person that had been drinking, and then you're responsible for them to be taken home. So anything that involves society, I think, just like, when teachers are involved, or any of the trusted systems, including policing, is involved in bad behavior that is potentially criminal, I think it's very important to tell others, because I think, something when I talk to people here is when people delay. I understand all the reasons for delaying, but I don't think if we don't educate properly, I believe they're victimized twice. The original trauma, and then that there's no revenue through the justice system because evidence can't be collected, and it becomes her word, his word against her word type thing. And so I think when we empower them to think about, well, what if someone else in your sorority, because predators, a lot of these folks that we're talking about are predators. And someone mentioned it, they choose almost sometimes people's online profile. I can meet somebody and probably within 20 minutes realize what their potential limits could be on behavior. I think we've all, had that bad date where someone was rude to a waiter, or you thought really quickly, oh, wow, this person isn't very nice, or a road rage incident. But in that online dating violence, I think sometimes we don't go with our instincts. We don't tell a friend what's going on, and we don't take some measures to protect ourselves, because online dating is an accepted practice. Getting in an Uber or Lyft is an accepted practice. But anything that society begins to normalize, people start to take advantage of. So the online thing, I think, the government probably spent $1 billion on see something, say something. But, even talking to a friend to show them a profile and go, this is what he's been telling me. What do you think about that? And I don't want to get too much on a tangent, but I have had some friends that have dated and recently, and just, I think it's a red flag if someone's willing to show you a part of their body that you only see in the shower very quickly, because what they're doing, and we could even mine this down into the grooming of underage people, that if you feel that's acceptable, that is like another checkbox to them on how they're going to break down you, and then get your trust, and then victimize you. And the attorneys and the people that are involved in the true, advocacy for victims know that, these aren't random things usually. A lot of times these are things that they have been groomed, led to believe it's a different person, behavior has been excused. And I think the more that society is showcasing these things, and, sadly for a lot of people, social media and a movie or something on YouTube educates them far more than, pamphlets, from 1999, a pamphlet with diagrams in it, and, handing that out. And we still do it today. We would be in the quad handing out a pamphlet to someone who doesn't even look at paper and saying, oh, you should read this pamphlet about your rights, as opposed to engaging like we are now. So kind of a long thing, but it is, when I see a TikTok video from my 15-year-old niece, it terrifies me, because I know the other side of that social media. Who else is looking at that?
Thank you for that, Chief Moore. Just to put in a quick plug, and I have to do it. We have all this content that we've been generating throughout the month, and we're hosting it on YouTube. So Nicole, could you drop our YouTube link in the chat for those of you who want this information to live on, it'll definitely be there, to Chief Moore's point. I want to come
Absolutely.
to
I'll put it in the chat.
perfect. I want to come to Trish on this one to ask the similar, question around, online violence through, social media or dating platforms. And what advice would you give someone who is being abused or potentially could be, a victim of online violence?
I think Chief Moore said it best, especially regarding the shower comment. I can't explain to you that I have multiple conversations with primarily college men, and I have to tell you, through investigations, I've looked at more people's cell phones through search warrants, and I just do not understand why people take certain photos anymore. I don't. Everybody takes a photo of something. Nothing. I'd like to say nothing surprises me after 9 years in this unit, but I am surprised on a daily basis. We are seeing a huge uptick in online violence and social media and dating applications. And when that was suggested as part of this discussion, I think it was really important because I don't think it's something that's spoken about very often. I think it's a newer area of sexual assault and people aren't quite sure. Like Chief Moore was saying, years ago when a lot of victims were prostitutes 30 and 40 years ago, that there wasn't as much trauma-informed discussions with those victims. And we've come a long way. I think we're at the beginning of how do we address online dating and dating application violence. In COVID, it's really how are you going to meet somebody when you're not out in class or in other places. So I understand that. I think it really goes back to also what Chief Bareno said of, you went to a dating app. People for some reason find some sort of shame in that. They don't want to say they had to use an application before COVID. That part I'm not really quite sure about, but I can tell you that pretty much a large population is using a dating app. And I think victims need to understand it doesn't matter if you're walking down the street and abducted by a stranger or went on a date with somebody that you trusted. You still have the right to say no. And I think for some reason it does go back to our previous question and having shame in the way that you met the person. You have to understand and think about really what a lot of the concerns are. Is like Chief Moore said, these are not most of the time one-offs. These are people who are looking for specific types of victims. And if I could open my office door and show you, my office faces the wall of cases that we weren't able to prosecute for a variety of reasons. And we are back in those boxes on a weekly basis because we have people that are back and reoffending. And I really don't share that lightly. It is horrifying. And I think people really need to keep that in mind. You are meeting somebody, and yes, it's a totally new way to date and to be there, but you need to kind of look at potentially red flags. As Chief Moore says, if somebody's immediately sending you photographs of genitalia on the first time that you're meeting with each other, that might be a red flag. When you're having these dates, they're not out in public places like it used to be. You're not going to that restaurant where it's safe, where there's other people around, where you're building a friendship. So a lot of these first dates are happening either in apartments or settings where there's not somebody there to be able to assist you if you need it. I was always taught, I grew up in a law enforcement family, you got to pay attention to your spidey sense. If something's not right, and we talked about the say something, see something, you need to trust your gut. And in these online dating apps, they're fine if that's the route you take, but you need to be safe about the situation. Think about it. Let your friends know, I'm going on a date with this person. I'm meeting this person. It's really going back to, as Rebecca said, and I hate to put it this way, those very basic lessons that we received in the 90s in our college classes, but it needs to be said to everybody, to men, to women. You need to just think about the surroundings and understand that it is not your fault if you trusted somebody, but try and pay attention to those warning signs to begin with, because again, and I'm going to say it till I'm blue in the face, and Rebecca says it all the time as well, these are not one-off type cases. If people are here, they're here for a reason, and we've seen them more and more and more. And it's just really concerning the amount of repeat violence we're seeing in these cases. And I think that pretty much sums it up. I can't say more than Chief Moore did.
And speaking of, Chief Moore, I seen your hand go up.
Yes, I
Go,
just
go ahead.
wanted to add just a little bit more on what Trish was saying. There's a book called The Gift of Fear by a guy named Gavin DeBecker. And one of the things, he just takes a snapshot of a situation where someone's in your building, you go into an elevator and you're holding groceries. And that, in the case the male says, hey, can I hold your groceries? And they say, no, I'm okay, that's okay. And they take the bag and say, no, let me help you. And one of the things he talks about is that person has already disregarded your feelings. That person, you've already told someone no, and they were doing it anyway. And we overlook those sometimes in society, but people take, and I think as men, with the Me Too movement, we're learning that some of our behavior that was, chivalrous or whatever was a negative connotation. And so I think some of those things is when you say, oh, I'm not really into that, and they want to show you that, or I'm not comfortable yet, and yet they press. And I think those are things like Tricia was saying, it's just the red flags. I don't, in about 2 years, we're going to go to a seminar and it's going to talk about the year of COVID and underreporting, the use of online platforms, the violence that has occurred that people did not want to call police. And I don't want to get into too much, but the police have been doing a lot of things this year that don't involve responding to 911 calls. And I just think about somebody who had the courage to talk, to call in, and maybe it happened yesterday, but they have got the courage to call, and they have to wait 6 or 8 hours for a police officer to even respond. And then who would want to do it? Who would want to, that window is small for us to start the process. And so I just think there's a lot of unintended consequences for the year of just where all the priorities of the health system. Can you imagine having the courage to go to, and I'll just say a system scripts, and you couldn't get in because of COVID, or there wasn't a face-to-face contact, or you walked in and you were overwhelmed on how many people were sick inside, or even just you didn't want to go to get an examination because you just didn't want to be a part of any medical system. So, it's a very deep thing that I hope there's more awareness, and I'm glad that's what we're about today for sure.
Absolutely. Really appreciate that. So Rebecca and then Chief Bareno, I know there's been a lot added here, but I want to create some room if you guys have anything you want to add about just this topic of online dating and online platforms and abuse that happens.
Yeah, so just a couple of thoughts that pertain to that is, we know that 1/4 to 1/3 of women are sexually assaulted in their lifetime, and that is not because 1/3 to 1/4 of men are sexually assaulting women. We know that it's a relatively small group of men performing multiple assaults, which goes to what Tricia was saying. A great book I read recently is Missoula by John Krakauer, and it's about Tricia's read it too. It's about the football team in Montana and some issues on that team and in the community's culture. I also know that drivers who are involved in a fatal collision where they kill someone, if that driver knows, okay, I killed someone because I ran a red light, or I killed someone because I was under the influence of alcohol, they're able to move on with their lives more easily than the driver or the accident investigator comes in and says the driver wasn't at fault. And the reason they can move on is because they know what to avoid to make sure they never kill anyone again. But if you're driving down the road and a kid runs in front of you and there was nothing you could have done to stop it, that could happen at any time. And so I think maybe sometimes our victims blame themselves because that in a weird way gives them power, to avoid the situation in the future, when really it may have been a situation that they could not have avoided. In terms of the online dating, we do prosecute a number of revenge porn cases in my unit. They're misdemeanors. And we had one before COVID where he did have multiple victims. So the most recent girlfriend, the ex-wife, he had taken compromising photos of them when the relationship was going well and posted them online. Tricia, I don't remember the name of the site, but it has red in the title. You probably know it. Anyway, there's all these Pornhub and other similar sites. And so they were getting 100,000 downloads, and it was mortifying for these women. Someone in my life, fortunately, they weren't sexually assaulted, but they were on an online dating platform and they were looking for a serious relationship. And someone messaged them, and my friend looked at the profile and said, well, you're just interested in dating. I only want a serious relationship, so I don't think we should meet. And the person persisted and persisted. And he said, look, I changed my profile. It says I want to date seriously. Now will you date me? And I said, that's a huge red flag. Why are they that interested in you? Like, no offense, but really. And this person ruined years of my friend's life with coercive control, which in California can now be used to gain a civil restraining order in a domestic violence situation, but previously was very difficult for the courts to recognize. And this person, has a master's degree, right? They own their home, they're confident, they have a good career, but I am telling you, years of their lives were ruined, getting sucked into this relationship when there was a huge red flag right at the beginning. And, the person they dated was very addicted to heroin and painkillers and, did various things throughout the relationship that I heard about later. And it kind of all goes back to that red flag. If at the beginning they're being that persistent, it's not romantic. And I think about, there's something about Mary and, High Fidelity to some extent, and all these movies where, oh, it's so romantic, he just won't give up. Well, it's not romantic. And I love the example that Chief Moore gave. If someone says, no, thanks, I can carry my own grocery bag, leave them alone because they have told you that they do not want you to take the bag.
Thank you for that. Chief Bareno.
Yes, in terms of the online dating, I'm gonna have to agree 100% with Chief Moore, what he was saying. In terms of, I'm the same way. I've never had Facebook. I don't know most of the names of the platforms, to be honest. My education has solely been on reporting incidents, and that's how I find out of what's what and how does it work. But I have to admit that the fear of not only my personal family and people that I know, given the fact that this platform, the online dating platform, I think is the best thing that could have happened to any person that wants to commit these kinds of crimes. We had not too long ago, we had one of our own instructors come and talk to us in regards to her 16-year-old daughter, which was chatting with this person online, which allegedly at the beginning, it was thought to be a teenager, in middle school or starting high school. It turned out to be a 37-year-old male that was contacting his daughter. They shared pictures. Same thing, same concept we're talking about. And for me as a parent, that's my worst nightmare, right? I have two boys. I don't have any daughters, but I have nieces that I love and dearly. And the last thing I would, and boys go too. Again, we just named that. It's not that they're excluded from this whole, send me your picture and sexting, I guess they call it, or something like that. There's all these new terms and ways. I believe it offers a great opportunity for predators, like Chief Morris as stated earlier, because you don't show your face. You put another picture, you put another profile, right? One day you're like Rebecca was saying, one day you're single, next day you're available, and who cares? This person is like your own little avatar that you create, and it's a perfect disguise. So I believe that the communication factor, right, and the big red flags, not only for the actual person or the victim in this case, but also for the parents, the friends, the brother, the sister, the law enforcement, the counselor, right? Everyone that gets these little signals should be something to say, hey, you know what? Have you thought about this? What if this has gone on? All the experiences that we have, transfer that over to them. The one thing, I have a nephew and a niece. My niece went to New York to study. My nephew went to Philadelphia. Okay. The one thing that I have, and I commented with my sister-in-law about it. My fear is this. Okay, when you have I comment, the privileged life is having your parents that take care of you. You have good set moral values and stuff like that. You've been protected throughout your life. You haven't seen the bad in the world, and you're sent out, right, to study abroad, some other state. You have no malice, right? You don't think about these things because you haven't heard about them. And I think that's the perfect opportunity for these people, these predators, to come in and attack that, the innocence per se, to a certain extent. Everybody's texting, or whatever they call it. Everybody's in Facebook. Everybody's sharing pictures. Why shouldn't I? They don't think about the negative consequences. And I think it's our duty, not only as law enforcement, but as counselors, as district attorneys, as a college community in its entirety, to name those negative factors on this, because they do exist. It's a perfect opportunity for a crime to happen. So I think presenting these kind of venues and sharing these kinds of opinions kind of opens a person's eyes. And, hope for the best, but always prepare for the worst. And that's the kind of mentality that we want to incite in these people.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Chief Bareno. So I want to ask one more question. I think this one will be a fairly quick one, and I want to leave a little room in case there's an audience who wants to chime in and ask a live question or engage with any of the panelists. So we've had a lot of great information, communicated today, right? And hopefully there's people out there who are hearing this and kind of see you all as the advocates that you are. But I want to ask one basic question that's still very important. So how do victims or survivors, depending on how they want to group themselves, how do they best engage with you? Where do they find you at? What do they do? How do they find Chief Moore? How do they find Chief Bareno and Rebecca and Trish in your offices? What's the best way to reach you guys and engage, and what does that process look like? Because I want to leave people with a way to take something away from this and say, here's what I'm going to do next, or here's what I'm going to tell somebody who's been victimized what to do to kind of, report and get some justice for themselves. And I'll start with Chief Moore.
Well, first of all, I have to thank Ursula for her passion in the chat. I'm digging it. Get you out there on campus with a bullhorn to start telling folks what they need to do. It's the longer I do the job, when I see police and they don't say hello to people, and our officers, and just like Chief Bareno, they're engagement people. They want to work at a college. And, one of our officers is so friendly, I think he might just say hello. And you just never know where someone's at. And especially when we had 5,000, 10,000 people in the morning, and I'd look at someone and say, hey, how are you? And they would just stop. And to be able to say, well, where's your class? Do you need help? And, I've been very humbled coming back to community college. I was a product of community college on just, for some people, just getting to school, getting the sprinter on time, the coaster on time, navigating the class. Did they have their books? Did they do their homework? And I think when we just say hello, it diffuses things to go, well, maybe I can talk to them about my friend. Or when we get the opportunity to be in classes, a few classes have invited us into Zoom. Like it's just, right now that police have probably a 9 out of 10 negative connotation or interaction. I mean, every day, San Diego PD is out finding the people that Rebecca and Tricia are filing cases on. They're stopping it. And if you don't read if the news doesn't report it, either out of privacy or just no awareness, we don't think it's happening. And so I just really think that, and with masks, it's tough to see someone smile even right now. I do notice that because my daughter worked at Ulta, a lot of women are doing more with their eyeliner and, trying to be more expressive, to distinguish themselves. But I just think if we just said hello to each other and honestly, it should be the police first. I've said hello to people and it's caught them off guard. Like, who do you think you are? Are you a person? What do you want to do to me that you're throwing me off saying hello because you're going to come grab me? And it's just the way things are right now. It's odd. It's just that we don't say hello to each other.
Thank you for that. Rebecca.
Sure. So reports of crime should go to your local police agency. If you're not sure who that is, you can, of course, contact my office. I get sent a lot of requests from, our general email. So if you do want to report something directly to the city attorney, it will make its way to me. And then myself or one of my attorneys or victim service coordinators will probably call you and, ask you to contact your local police department. That's not us punting the ball. Unlike the district attorney's office, we have no sworn law enforcement personnel in our office. I can't take a crime report directly because then boom, I'm a witness to the crime, and then I can't go in court and prosecute the crime. So I think that's important to understand, if we do route people away. But I often talk to victims, and because I'm a unit chief, I don't talk to, your happy customers, right? I talk to people who are really upset that we're filing charges because they didn't want charges filed. They just wanted the police to come that night and make it stop in the moment. And now they've reconciled with their partner. And we might have a similar dynamic in a sexual assault or sexual battery type of case. Or I get the people who are really upset that we're not filing because they did have the courage to come forward and talk to law enforcement and tell the patrol officer what happened and confirm their statement with the detective. And then it makes its way to us and we determine we don't have sufficient evidence to file. But what we do is, like Trisha's office, we keep all those files. And so once we get 2 or 3 reports on the same person, then even if the evidence isn't great for any one case, when you look at them together, it makes a much stronger case. Because why are all these 3 people saying you did the same thing? They don't know each other. Or you've done the same thing, every year to the same woman. And she's told stories of this assault to different officers each time. So I'm not a first responder. I have the comfort of reading case files in my office. But I think your best bet is to definitely call your local law enforcement, and don't be discouraged even if it's a delayed report, because if they've done it to you, they've likely done it to someone else. And if there's 4 of you delayed reporting, that could be sufficient for a case to move forward and for this person to be held accountable.
Thank you, Rebecca, for that. Trish, coming to you next. How can victims or survivors best engage with your office?
I think Rebecca pretty much said it best and summed it up. Our offices are very similar. Even though we do have district attorney investigators, there's very few divisions within our office that can take those direct crime reports. So if you are ever in doubt, or a friend of yours is in doubt, or something happened, they can call us. Like Rebecca, I'm a team leader down here. I'm not quite at Rebecca's level, but I take a lot of phone calls from either happy or unhappy customers. And part of my responsibility is making sure a victim does get to the right place. You will never hear from my office, sorry, we can't help you. What we will do is we'll get you to the right agency. And sometimes people do, as Chief Morris talked about, right now there is a general distrust for law enforcement. And sometimes people might not feel comfortable calling law enforcement and say, hey, I know the DA has advocacy. Our DA does a lot of community outreach. I want to call her. I want to send them an email. You have that option, and we are never going to punt. We're going to get you to the right place to make sure your voice is heard. The other thing is, Ursula, like Chief Moore said, I love your passion. And what you said is spot on, is that we have a responsibility as law enforcement, but also as a community on the campuses to educate each other. And the more the word gets out to victims, whether it's something that happened the day before, something that happened 6 months ago, something that happened 6 years ago, your voice has a right and responsibility to be heard by law enforcement. And sometimes people think, well, there's nothing we can do. There's none of this. There's no evidence. We are very creative in ways that we don't necessarily disclose, but I can tell you we are a very creative group. And we will find ways, if a crime was committed, to investigate it fully. And so if somebody's brave enough to tell you, I don't think law enforcement can do anything, or anything of that nature, have a little bit of faith in us, a little bit. And we want to make sure people are protected. And so I guess I would say, be a voice. Kind of like that, see something, say something, be that hello voice. Like Chief Moore said, be there for that person. If a person trusts you enough to disclose, you have that information to get to us. And as long as that voice gets over, we can start the process for evaluating a case, no matter where it goes, whether we can issue or not issue. And just leaving you with one example that I think is really important, especially on the college campuses with drug and alcohol facilitated sexual assaults being very rampant, is we recently prosecuted a case before COVID. We were actually supposed to sentence right around the time that everything shut down, that there was an individual where there were 8 separate women who reported to law enforcement that they had been sexually assaulted. And the detectives in those cases had investigated in every single possible way they could, but this person was a predator and he knew how to get away with it. And it wasn't just one DA making an evaluation or one detective. It was always a different set of eyes, always a different group trying to do something with these cases, trying their hardest to put something together. And finally, he slipped up on his last victim. He got careless, and those women having the voice and the bravery to come forward, we were able to file every single one of those cases. And he was convicted of those sexual assaults. We don't ever give up. Law enforcement never, ever gives up. And it was because those women were so brave, and it took all of those cases together to say, hey, this isn't a mistake. This is pretty consistent, that we were able to get justice. And yes, it was delayed, but we were able to fight and work together as a team. So please continue to educate. And this program is excellent. I already copied the link. Thank you very much for the other parts of it. But watch out for each other, okay? And be that voice. And Ursula, I'm sure I will be hearing from you.
Absolutely. So Chief Bareno, I'm going to give you last word on this topic of how the campus community and the community in general could engage with you in your office in terms of either preventing or reporting sexual violence.
Well, we do have the same issues that Chief Moore just mentioned regarding the trust factor, right? Regarding, especially now with everything that's been going on, we haven't had students back, so we haven't really seen that detachment. We've seen it out in the streets. We've seen it when we approach people outside. That doesn't mean that people as a whole, the majority has a distrust for law enforcement, but there's less willingness to come and make that contact, initiate that contact. I think communication, and like Tricia pointed out and Ursula pointed out, education is a must, right? Because it takes partnerships, okay? It takes partnerships, and we're lucky enough, Chief Moore and myself are lucky enough to work in a community college because of that reason, precisely. I think it's much easier to build these partnerships with people that you see on a regular basis, right? To educate, to direct, to say, hey, this would help us tremendously. Have a meeting, have a Zoom meeting, share, hey, if you hear this from a student, if you have these issues right here, please refer them to us. Please refer them to Title IX office, Student Affairs office. We have a very good Title IX and Student Affairs office. We work very closely together. And I think we share information on a daily basis. We have a behavioral intervention team, right? That sometimes some sort of crimes such as these are discussed under these meetings. And what happens is we become like a networking type of department that if something raises a red flag, it's immediately reported to us. At the same time, we need to work as a department, as a police department, to build on that trust. And that's the direction that I'm taking the department right now. And a lot of the departments are adopting this because we cannot lose that trust. The minute we lose that trust, the fight in crime becomes that much greater. And we need to preserve this trust and actually even make it better. And the only way to do that is through advocates, partnerships, and communication. And everything has been mentioned by all of you today, as a matter of fact. So I think this is one of the steps. Many of them should come forward, and I think that would be detrimental for our relationships and fighting these crimes, making our educational institutions, our cities, our schools, everything safer.
Thank you so much for that, Chief Bareno. And thanks to all the panelists. I think this has been really, really good information, and I'm glad we recorded it so we can, have it live on for forever. So we still got a few moments left. So I want to see if there's any questions that any of our audience members has, or any of our panelists, or any, comments that you want to make in furtherance of this conversation.
I don't have a question, just to say thank you. This was, I don't know what I was expecting actually when I came, but I'm so glad I came and I was able to attend and listen. I was telling Andre in the chat, I was fairly happy to see that we knew most of this information we already knew, but I'm almost 50, so we should know, but it just frustrates me to know that there are even people with my age, but younger kids and younger folks that just don't know. They don't know this information, and they're being taken advantage of and raped and other things, and they're just scared to say it because, like you said, they think I was dancing provocatively, or I had on a short skirt, or I invited him. It just frustrates me. So advocates and educating people and continuing to tell people, your voice matters. I'm here to support you. I think that all goes a long way, but it just frustrates me. I don't know if it's passion or a little bit of violent thoughts, but it does frustrate me when I think of people that do these type of things, and then especially when they get away with it. So thank you so much, everyone, for everything that you do. It really is appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Ursula. I'm not seeing any other, comments out there.
Well, Marquise, I had a question I was thinking of. It kind of came up while you were talking about the online portion, and I was wondering if for any of you, what advice would you give to anyone? This kind of goes back to the online issue. You talked specifically about online dating, but there's a broader issue about just general unsolicited online abuse comments, especially of a sexual nature, on platforms. It makes so easy for people to do this. They don't have a profile picture. You don't know their true identity, and they'll just abuse you. They just want to, say these hurtful comments to someone. And I haven't really said this much, but one time I was in a chat. I didn't, invite this person to message me, but they started spewing comments, and some of them were unfortunately of a sexual nature, and it was very hurtful to me. I didn't know what to do, and so I didn't know who to turn to. I didn't know who this person was. They were just an anonymous person that decided to message me privately very hurtful things. So what would you recommend to give these advice to people that go through things like that?
Go ahead, Trish.
Well, I can tell you, Nicole, and I don't even know if Rebecca knows this. I answered the phone several years ago, and it was a person asking if I wanted to redo my mortgage. And I said no. And then all of a sudden, that person started repeatedly calling me and leaving a random stranger incredibly sexually inappropriate messages and doing very incredibly sexually inappropriate things on my voicemail. And it was very unnerving, and it was very scary. And I thought to myself, well, I don't know this person. How do I take care of this? And I'm in law enforcement. And I ended up contacting the police, and the police were wonderful because I had all of those messages, because the person was stupid enough to leave all of the messages. And I thought, well, what are the police going to do? But I really was in fear about this. And the police were wonderful. And they have tools that they can use to locate these individuals. And there are crimes that Rebecca's office prosecutes and takes very seriously, that it actually can be a crime for somebody to call and repeatedly harass somebody. And there are different levels depending on where it escalates to. So sometimes I think people would be nervous to contact the police about something like that. But if it's repeated harassment and sexual and escalating, there are ways to investigate that law enforcement can use, investigative techniques that the general public's not necessarily aware of. I mean, especially if you're in fear for your safety, you should never, ever, ever just tolerate that. And I think a lot of people in this day and age go, well, what am I supposed to do? It's something that's online. Well, when people do things online, it is still potentially a crime. And I can tell you, Rebecca's office is very busy with calls or revenge porn or things of that nature that really we have worked very hard in the last several years with trying to catch up legally with new technology. So, I mean, every situation is different. Sometimes people say don't poke the bear and engage somebody, and it all really depends on the situation. But I am a huge advocate, and I always tell people, no matter what the level of fear is or potential crime, if you think that you are being abused in some way, or that there is some sort of danger or threat, or it's repeated, I would recommend contacting law enforcement. And I know they take those calls and they take them regularly. Like I said, I'm primarily assigned to San Diego State, but I get them all the time from San Diego State. And I'm sure the chiefs have fielded these calls as well, especially in an online age, and they will investigate them.
Thank you. Go ahead, Rebecca.
And depending on the platform, it might not be an effective step, but you still could and ought to notify the platform, right? So I've seen things on Facebook where I've reported them as inappropriate. I'm not saying these platforms do a great job about it, but some are starting to try, especially as it's become clearer that women running for office and women holding public office and any woman basically with a high profile has been subject to some really vulgar comments online from trolls. And so if they're doing it to you, perhaps there are 5 other complaints about this person. So I hope it doesn't happen again, but if it does, you may want to consider contacting the platform.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chief Moore.
Yeah, I think we need to do well to protect ourselves. When you think about that dating profile, instead of saying you live in Chula Vista, maybe you say you live in San Diego. And, some of us here on this call, have unusual names, that there isn't 10,000 of you, more is like the 10th common name. So you need to think about that. I think we're all so vulnerable on social media that we forget that there is a sinister aspect to that, whether it's fraud, but there's also that thing where people can find out a lot about you very quickly. And we wouldn't want, the awful thing that happened to Nicole. We already, physically work at certain locations. We represent a certain agency, but just being cautious. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with unplugging from the platform. I think we all have to take that once in a while, that, it's different if it's a Zoom call and it's professional, but I think we all have to take a break from social media at times and just find someone to talk face to face to, and remember that there's normal people in the world, but it's very terrifying what people can do in anonymity.
Agreed. Go ahead, Chief Bareno.
If I may also add, we need to remind ourselves as well that it's and I agree with that 100% to everything that was just said in regards to the actual online issue. What I would recommend as well is that's 50% of the healing, right? The coming up, actually identifying these people, getting them charged, moving through the system. There's this 50% aspect of it, and that's the well-being of the victim, right? And that needs to be also noted, not only by the victim themselves, but also the people who surround this victim, whether it might be teachers, friends, family, whatever it is, because that affects you. The cyberbullying is very, very real. The psychological damages this place into these people, not only affecting future investigation or that same investigation. That's how I do believe it was Trisha that mentioned there's a lot of people that back up in the middle of the investigation. Hey, I don't want anything to do with it anymore. I'm not cooperating. And that hinders the process. And it's mainly because there's this trauma-induced factor there that was never fixed, because they're still suffering through those things. I know the person that I mentioned to you earlier, my family member, had to go through, I want to say about 1.5 years of therapy, right? That was one at the young person, the 16-year-old female that I talked about, is still going through therapy right now because she fell in love with this person. And so those are the things that's 50%, right? Getting this person to stop committing these crimes is 50%. And then there's a healing part, because we owe that to the victim as well. So that needs to be also regarded.
Amazing answer. So this has been a great session. Thank you, Chief Moore. Thank you, Chief Bareno. Rebecca and Trish, thank you for representing your offices well. I know this hopefully is the first of many that we do. Really appreciate all the audience members coming through as well. As soon as we end this meeting, the recording will do its thing, and Nicole will be able to post it up sometime over the next few hours once we get the download. So thanks again to our panelists. Thanks for the audience. Really appreciate you guys. And I wish everybody continue to have a blessed day and hopefully engage in some of that content we got up online.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. And Marquise, I don't know if you have it up, but do you have the numbers for people to contact if they feel like they need help, SBCS and CCS?
Thank you for that. And I don't have it up right now.
That's okay. I can pull it up real quick. Let me just, I can say it.
That's a good point. So while Nicole's pulling that up, for any of our audience members, there's a lot of heavy information in some of these sessions. So we always.
Yeah, I have it up.
Okay, my screen switched. I thought it ended the Zoom. So
no, it's still going. Don't worry.
It was really funny what just happened. So we always want to provide information for victim support services from South Bay Community Service, now known as SBCS, or the Center for Community Solutions. So Nicole will drop some of those numbers in the chat. Should anything that has been said here or experienced online trigger you, you'll be able to reach out to those agencies for some help. And they're both our partners and have those resources.
So yeah, I can read it out, I guess. But yeah, if you need help, you can contact 1-800-640-2933, and that's the 24/7 hotline for SBCS, or 888-385-4657, which is Center for Community Solutions. And we want to thank everyone for coming today. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to engage with this session. Please feel free to look at the YouTube page and share this link with anyone that you feel that it would be helpful for. All of our YouTube content is public and available to everyone. So we really encourage people to watch our sessions that we have so far. There've been some great sessions that we had earlier this month, and we are not done yet. We still have some more sessions coming up. We've got a session on reclaiming personal empowerment tomorrow, and then we are finishing off with an in-person screening of the Netflix film Roll Red Roll, which talks about sports teams and parties and all of that. You know, a lot of the stuff we talked about earlier about men not, stepping in and helping to intervene in a situation where someone is incapacitated. So it's a really great film. We encourage people to look it up and sign up. It's this Thursday at 7:30 on our campus. So thank you, everyone. We really had a great time talking with all of you. Thank you to all the panelists. We appreciate your expertise. And yeah, I hope everyone has a great day.
Absolutely.